Hello and welcome, I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. US President Donald Trump insists only his troops are stopping the city from, quote, burning to the ground, even as state leaders call the deployment deranged and un-American. This comes after hundreds of US Marines arrive in Los Angeles overnight on President Trump's orders, igniting a showdown with California Governor Gavin Newsom. 10 people are killed when a suspected shooter opens fire at a southeast Austrian school. The Graz mayor, Elke Carr, confirms several students and one adult are among the dead as police lock down the city. Washington and Beijing gather in London for day 2 of high-stakes talks to cool a heated tariff war. A US Treasury spokesman says negotiators resumed this morning, hinting both sides still want a badly needed deal. Greta Thunberg is deported from Israel and flies to France after the Navy blocks her and others from sailing to Gaza, aiming to deliver aid and raise awareness. Other pro-Palestinian activists fight deportation as they push for humanitarian support. The United Kingdom sanctions 2 Israeli far-right ministers over comments they made on Gaza. UK Foreign Minister David Lammy says Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich had incited extremist violence and serious abuses of Palestinian human rights. Israel issues evacuation warnings for several areas of northern Gaza amid escalating violence in the Gaza Strip. This comes after local health authorities report 17 people are killed after the IDF opened fire on a group of Palestinians near an aid point in the same region. Moscow launches one of its largest airstrikes on Kiev in over 3 years of war and struck a maternity ward in the southern city of Odessa, killing 3 people. The strikes come in retaliation from Russia after multiple Ukrainian attacks deep within Russian territory. Iranian lawmakers say that the US and Israel are seeking to turn nuclear talks into a strategic trap for Iran. This comes just a day after, days before a planned 6th round of Iran-US nuclear talks in Oman. India has formally escalated concerns with US authorities following a viral social media post claiming that an Indian national was detained and allegedly mistreated at Newark Airport in New Jersey. The Ministry of External Affairs has taken up the matter directly with the embassy in New Delhi, while diplomatic missions in Washington, D.C. and New York are also in close contact with US officials. However, a clear picture of the incident and the circumstances surrounding the detention remains elusive. We now move on once again. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi is set to embark on a significant diplomatic outreach to Europe, with planned stops in Cyprus and Croatia. The visit, scheduled en route to and from the upcoming G7 summit in Canada, are part of India's broader strategy to strengthen its presence and partnerships across the European continent. Now, our top story today. We move to the United States. As the situation in Los Angeles escalates, US President Donald Trump has said that only his deployment of Marines and other soldiers to the Californian city is preventing it from, quote, burning to the ground. Pete Hegseth, Defense Secretary, has backed him and said that the deployment of the National Guard and the Marines is aimed at protecting ICE agents. This comes as Trump deployed another 2,000 National Guard troops and 700 US Marines in response to the protests taking place in Los Angeles. Trump has also claimed that 25,000 houses have burnt to the ground in LA due to a, quote, incompetent governor and mayor. That's alleging to the LA wildfires. Meanwhile, alleged footage shows that massive loots are happening in stores in downtown LA. Trump has blamed what he called insurrectionists for violence in Los Angeles and praised his decision to send in troops. He later suggested he'd support the arrest of Governor Gavin Newsom for obstructing immigration enforcement. On the other hand, Governor Newsom has called the deployment deranged and un-American and warned that Trump is urging the military to intimidate Americans on US soil. California has also filed a lawsuit against the federal government and called the deployment unconstitutional. Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass has condemned the federal raids that triggered the unrest. She urged the Trump administration to stop the raids and respect state authority. The United Nations has also expressed concern over the situation, urging all sides to avoid further militarization and calling for calm, stability and restraint across all levels of government. These protests broke out after ICE agents detained dozens across Los Angeles last week, while demonstrators have since calmed. Officials say the federal troop presence is straining local agencies. We're now joined by our guest today, Adrian Calamel, who's a terror scholar, and he's located in New York, the United States. Adrian, thank you very much for joining us on the program. Adrian, this situation has been escalating over the past few days, with protesters starting to simmer down and troop presence seeming to increase. Is this response from the Trump administration warranted?
First of all, thank you for having me, Thomas. Good evening to all your viewers. And I do believe this is absolutely warranted in this case for several reasons. One, the amount of damage that is being done to the city of Los Angeles. Okay, that's one. Number two, to guarantee the safety, not just of the ICE agents, but of the people there. The people whose stores are being looted. It's a breakdown, it's lawlessness. I don't disagree necessarily with Trump when he says they are insurrectionists. So when you look at the responsibility of the federal government, of really any government, if you look at Edmund Burke, political science, your number one responsibility is to protect your domestic population from violence from inside. So when the state of California has failed and continues to fail across the board on multiple issues, multiple crises, then the federal government needs to be called in.
Yes, and Adrian, just moving on, the American political system is built on a system of checks and balances. Do you think Donald Trump is going too far in overriding Governor Newsom, also even commenting that he thinks he should go to jail for his actions, both in this context, and also he brought up the LA wildfires as well as some context. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think calling for his arrest and taking him to jail, that's over the top, okay? Just let the next election kind of sort itself out and see where Gavin Newsom does with the election. I do find it very interesting that now the Democrats, who have always had a problem with certain states claiming states' rights, and this is one of the big debates in the United States, federal government versus states' rights. Democrats have always been on the side of the federal government. It's been the argument of the Republicans that states' rights are infringing upon our states' rights. Now you have Gavin Newsom doing this, which is very strange. It's kind of a role reversal, and it's being used as a political lightning rod, and he needs to understand that he's adding to the problem here, and I fully expect this now that you see a heavy presence, you're going to see this shift. It's going to shift to other places. It's going to shift to Dallas. It's going to shift to San Francisco. You're going to have to look at places like Chicago. You're going to have to look at places such as Michigan. It's going to be movement, and that's what Trump needs to understand. And what unfortunately Gavin Newsom will never understand is that our adversaries, specifically non-state actors, are looking on how they can capitalize on this type of situation. And then you also have state actors such as China, the Islamic Republic of Iran, basically soft power campaign egging on these movements. So there's an outside hand playing here. that's helping, and there's people on the ground, and this is well organized, and I expect it to continue. Once it gets shut down in LA, it's going to move somewhere else.
Adrian, California is obviously historically a democratic state. Critics are saying that this move is political from Trump. Obviously, these immigration raids is something that Trump campaigned on, and some would say that he won the election on. But some people are also saying that Donald Trump wouldn't have acted this way if there were protests against something else, not one of his most staunch policies. What would you say to those critics?
Well, I would say to those critics that this is about law and order. We cannot have if you remember the last year of the Trump administration, it was the BLM movement. It was going around burning down Minneapolis, burning down different cities for one reason or another. During the Biden administration, it was raising Hamas flags, going down the streets, causing damage, intimidating people, virulent anti-Semitism. Now they've just picked up another flag and moved on to something else and a new cause. There's groups like Antifa, other individuals, Social Justice for Palestine, they're all involved in these riots. So Trump absolutely is doing the correct thing here and needs to stamp down on this. Law and order needs to be protected in our country. And this is one of the strategies of our adversaries, is to divide our population. And when our government officials are using language that divides us instead of working together and realize that this is public safety here. These are not peaceful protests. Throwing rocks, throwing Molotov cocktails, throwing what are basically improvised explosives. I mean, they're not large explosives, but that's extremely dangerous. It's going to lead to deaths, and it's going to be on Gavin Newsom's hand. It shouldn't be on the ICE or any type of administration's hand.
Adrian Calamel, thank you very much for joining us on the programme and for your insight. We have some breaking news coming in now. The European Commission has introduced an 18th round of sanctions against Russia in response to its invasion in Ukraine, targeting Moscow's energy revenues, banks and military industry. The new sanctions package includes a ban on transactions involving Russia's Nord Stream gas pipelines. It also targets banks that are found to be circumventing existing sanctions. The Commission has suggested reducing the G7 price cap on Russian crude oil from $60 down to $45 per barrel in an effort to further decrease Russia's energy revenues. Let's listen in to EU's Ursula von der Leyen's statements.
Russia's goal is not peace, it is to impose the rule of might. Therefore, we are ramping up pressure on Russia because strength is the only language that Russia will understand.
For our next story, we move to the Middle East, where Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Saar has announced the UK's sanctions on two far-right Israeli ministers, Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich, who face travel bans and asset freezes over their comments and conduct regarding the war in Gaza. This is what the Israeli Defence Minister said while denouncing the sanctions in the strongest words.
We were informed about UK decision to include two of our ministers on the British sanctions list. It is outrageous that elected representatives and members of the government are subjected to this kind of measures. I discussed it earlier today with Prime Minister Netanyahu, and we will hold a special government meeting early next week to decide on our response to this unacceptable decision.
UK Foreign Secretary David Lammy said the two ministers incited extremist violence and violated Palestinian human rights, adding the sanctions reflect Britain's push for a ceasefire, aid increase and a two-state solution. Norway, Canada, Australia, New Zealand have also joined the UK in this step. In a separate incident, Swedish activist Greta Thunberg accused Israel of kidnapping her and other aid workers in international waters after their vessel heading to Gaza was intercepted. This is what the climate activist alleged.
Did an illegal act by kidnapping us on international waters and against our will, bringing us to Israel, keeping us in the bottom of the boat, not letting us getting out and so on. But that is not the real story here. The real story is that there is a genocide going on in Gaza and a systematic starvation following the siege and blockade now, which is leading to food, medicine, water that are desperately needed to get into Gaza is prevented from.
In a turn of events, for the first time, Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas has publicly condemned Hamas's October the 7th attack, calling it unacceptable and condemnable. He also urged the group to immediately release all remaining hostages. We're now joined by Peter Baum, who is the foreign editor of the Weekly Blitz, and he's located in London. Peter, thank you very much for joining us on the programme. Peter, these sanctions on Itamar Ben-Gvir and Smotrich comes after some quite outspoken opposition and action from the United Kingdom and other Western allies of Israel. What are your thoughts on these new sanctions and also a travel ban that will prevent these Israeli ministers from coming to the United Kingdom?
Yes, good evening, Thomas, to you and your listeners and viewers. The action, the latest round of sanctions by the Keir Starmer government was actually made as a deflection to things going on domestically in the UK. You may or may not be aware that currently in the United Kingdom, the Labour government had to do the most incredible economic U-turn of any government in the last probably 200 years regarding a policy that condemned pensioners to basically taxes on their winter fuel allowances. And the government needed a deflection to take away from this U-turn, and the best way to do that in United Kingdom politics at the moment is to kick Israel. They needed to flatter the mob, to take away the headline stories away from their disastrous economic policies, and needed a headline to assist them. The sanctions, in effect, will have no real practical course. Smotrich and Ben-Gvir were never going to come to the UK anyway. They don't have assets in the UK, so the sanctions themselves are meaningless. All it has done is to give a high-profile anti-Israel deflection to their supporters in the United Kingdom. So, and obviously it's upset the Israeli government. What the Israeli government's response will be, we don't know. But the sanctions themselves are meaningless and purely designed to deflect away from the economic problems this current Labour government find themselves in.
Okay,
it's interesting.
But Peter, could I just put a point to you 1 second? Britain isn't the only country that has done this. We've also had a joint statement from Norway, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and others. We have Spain as well involved in this. These are countries that have also very recently are traditional allies of Israel and have. Some have been debating sanctions. Some have put sanctions on Israeli settlers in the West Bank. This isn't just the UK speaking out and acting against a traditional alliance with Israel. What's your response to that?
Okay, well, the traditional allies may have been traditional allies decades ago, but certainly in modern times, if you look at the voting patterns of the United Nations, Spain and Norway have certainly not been allies of Israel. They've been very, very anti-Israel, in fact. And under the new administration in Canada, Carney is certainly not pro-Israel, and Albanese certainly has not been. So traditional allies, yes, going back decades perhaps, but in more recent times, absolutely not. These are not allies of Israel, and the Starmer government, again, is bowing down to the mob, and it needed a deflection from the disastrous economic policies. And it's interesting that the BBC has the sanctions on Israel as its main headline news on the hour, on the TV news, and indeed on the website. It's taken the place of the atrocities in Austria. It's taken over from the Russia, Ukraine, and from the LA riots. So sanctioning 2 Israeli ministers, the BBC has done the job that the government wanted it to do by deflecting the stories away from more important stories. And again, when the government need an excuse, it's usually a good one to kick Israel. That will get all the headlines. That will give their supporters the necessary uplift they need.
Okay, Peter, let's move on now. We obviously saw Greta Thunberg and 11 other activists. We saw their vessel intercepted in international waters by the Israeli army. Greta Thunberg has labelled this as kidnapping, since due to the fact that it was in international waters. What are your thoughts on her statement there?
Yeah, well, frankly, Greta Thunberg just seeks publicity wherever she can make it. As a climate activist, isn't it ironic that she came on a vessel that polluted the oceans? I mean, she cannot be taken seriously other than by those whose sole agenda is to demonise the Jewish state of Israel. I've been looking at social media quite recently about her, and for the first time I've noticed a sway of opinion that once she would have virtual 99% support, and now she's really being made to be look like a laughing stock. She surely cannot be taken seriously on any activity that she gets involved with. She's made a fool of herself regarding her climate change activism, and I think this anti-Israeli activism will go the same way as that. She'll wait to jump on the next bandwagon, whatever that may be, in the months ahead.
Okay, Peter Baum, thank you very much for joining us on the programme. We stay in Europe for our next story, where Austria has declared 3 days of national mourning after a deadly school shooting in Graz that left 10 dead and several others injured. Chancellor Christian Stocker called it a very dark day and an act of unimaginable violence. Austrian Interior Minister Karner confirmed the shooting suspect was a 22-year-old former student, and he was found dead, reportedly with a pistol and a shotgun. Mayor Elke Carr described the attack as a terrible tragedy. The school has been evacuated and police have secured the area. Austria's foreign minister called the incident unbearable, while the EU officials stressed that children must feel safe in schools. Meanwhile, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz has also offered his condolences and called the incident horrific. Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni also expressed sorrow over the tragedy, extending heartfelt condolences to victims, families, and solidarity with the injured and their loved ones on behalf of herself and her government. With one of Europe's most armed civilian populations, Austria has seen shootings before, including the 2020 Vienna terror attack. An investigation is underway, but for now, police believe the attacker acted alone. We're now joined by Ross Feingold, who is a political analyst, and he's located in Taipei, Taiwan. Ross, thank you very much for joining us. This is quite a rare event that we're seeing today, a school shooting in Europe. We've seen this before through the likes of Dunblane in Scotland, in the United Kingdom. Looking at the Western world as well, you have obviously the Christchurch shooting that happened in New Zealand. We saw legislation brought in directly after this event. Do you think that there's any indication that Austria might do the same thing after this happens?
certainly after this incident, Austria as well as the EU will be revisiting their gun control laws. But as you mentioned, there's a lot of guns in circulation in Austria. Some estimates of unregistered guns are as high as a million guns in circulation. There are also a lot of legal guns in circulation as well, for example, for hunting. Passing more laws are not going to change the number of illegal guns that are in circulation, but it will make the politicians feel good. The interesting thing to watch, though, is with the rise of right-wing political parties in many parts of Europe, and certainly with the Trump administration in the United States, which is pro-gun and really opposes gun control, what's going to be the pushback to stricter gun laws? I think, unlike maybe if this incident had occurred 5, 10, 15 years ago, there's probably going to be a lot of people who push back on gun control and say that, no, this is a right for people to own guns.
And how does such attacks obviously affect public debate about gun control and safety in schools? We reiterate that this isn't something that happens in Europe as frequently as it does in the United States, but do you think that this will spark some sort of conversation in the region?
I'm sure it will. And you get into questions about what kind of procedures or security measures do schools need to have. We often think of schools as being a kind of open campus environment. There aren't guards on all the doors or locks on all the doors of a school typically. But that's where we've moved in the United States, especially with secondary schools in the United States, and there typically are now controls on the doors, and there's even detectors that students have to pass through when they enter the building, metal detectors. So it's possible that Europe, however reluctant it might have to move to a more secure school environment, typically what we've seen in the United States. But there'll be, like I said, there will be a lot of pushback against that in Europe.
Yes, Ross, and you've also linked this to the rise of the far right in Europe, not directly, I mean, but there obviously is. Do you think there is a danger of these incidents becoming politicised rather than focusing on the victims and the solutions of these tragedies?
Certainly, this will become politicized. If far-right parties feel that gun ownership is an inherent right, then they're going to use all their efforts that they can to inflame the conversation and to oppose additional gun control measures. And then it'll be up to the non-far right, the left of center and the right of center parties to form coalitions around this issue in different countries in Europe. But frankly, I'm not optimistic about additional gun control across the European Union. I think with the rise of right-wing parties, we're going to see a lot of pushback.
Ross Feingold, thank you very much, as always, for joining us on the programme. It's a pleasure. Well, that is all that we have time for, and we will continue to bring you more news up.